Schizophrenics of Reddit. What were the first signs of your break from reality and how would you warn others for early detection? Hard to say where it started. I was very isolated at the time. I was just very confused, I think. More than hallucinations, I saw meaning behind everything and every coincidence. What that meaning was, didn't really know. Eventually just decided it was my brain telling me I'm schizophrenic, which I was very lucky to do. I went in for treatment of depression and was in the psych ward for 2 weeks, then probably a month after that I asked my doctor what was really wrong with me. It was pretty funny thinking back on it. I don't know how she didn't laugh in my face. Like, B, you've been talking to yourself and thought the TV was communicating things to you. You're probably going to get better answers from loved ones of schizophrenics, seeing as it's a coin toss whether or not we have any insight at all. She probably didn't laugh because it was the first time you finally noticed something was wrong. She was probably relieved and hopeful. As someone who has schizophrenia, reading all the comments on this thread made me feel about 5,000 times less alone than usual. That being said, for me, it was thinking that all my friends were plotting against me, so much so that I started digging as hard as I could to find as much dirt on everyone as possible. Auditory hallucinations followed that pretty quickly. At its worst, I began misremembering important life events, only to find out years later that what I felt I so vividly remembered to be true was actually not. But I guess that's psychosis for you. Meds, therapy, and a fiancé and friends who have your back all work wonders though. They don't judge me when things get rough. A surprising number of mentally normal people misremember major life events. Studies on famous events like the JFK assassination, death of Princess Di, etc., showed that having a vivid memory of something does not correlate to the accuracy of the memory. Careful worrying too much about auditory or visual hallucinations though. You can get both of these from something as simple as really bad sleep deprivation. I've been there, and while that's also pretty unhealthy, it's not as big of a concern as other issues. Also, just like your eyes try to find faces and images, I think sometimes you can hear your voice in random noise. I thought I was an alien descended to Earth to assist in saving humanity cause a picture fell out of a book. I thought if I killed myself I could escape this realm and be back with my extraterrestrial family, the only place I belonged. In silence, it was like I could hear 1,000 different TV news broadcasts at once. I was always being followed by a dark force. I'm okay now. Reading this nearly has me in tears honestly. I'm 17 and I recently started hearing crowds cheering, people chatting, and jumbled radio broadcasts in silence. Always hear my name being called, or random phrases like come on but no one's around. First thing was hearing voices of people I knew calling my name when they couldn't possibly be there. Like, I would hear a family member or friend that lives 3 hours away by car. Then I started seeing objects, often while driving. Once on a lonely Nebraska night on Highway 2, a giant radio tower suddenly appeared in front of me in the road, and then dissipated when I drove through it. I also see silhouettes of people occasionally. Worst visual I have gotten was a very real looking man trying to break into my house during the day and it freaked me the frick out. Happened twice. That sounds like torture. Life is hard enough without having to doubt your eyes and ears. Hope you're doing well, friend. This sounds like a joke, but it's my real advice. If the shadow people acknowledge you, maybe see a doctor. Otherwise, just get some sleep. I'm laying in bed and now I'm kinda scared of the shadow people mayo. It started with not needing to sleep as much. Countless days of being awake, driving endlessly to pointless destinations, disregarding police authority. Diagnosed schizoaffective bipolar here. Basically I have both schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. It started when I was 5 years old. I would see dead people, feel the presence of ghosts, smell rust and metals, hear voices and thoughts of other people. As a teenager I thought I was a psychic. As an adult I started a job as a psychic medium. I legit thought I could predict the future. One day I just decided I'm freaking crazy and got a psych eval. Been on medication ever since and super grounded. My major triggers are fourth wall breaking video games and TV shows. The Truman Show is also horrifying for me. The smell part really hits home to me. Every time I feel like I'm about to go into another episode, I can smell an insane amount of iron and foulness. At that point I realize that it's time to slow it down, eat solid food, and rest. Only problem after that is to try not to dive into depression. I had a friend who started talking about a random new program he was working on Facebook. He was a cake decorator, so no one knew what he was talking about. Then he was randomly posting things like F everyone. He had very angry posts and then he would post a bunch of random numbers the next day. He kept saying he was working on the programs and these were the numbers he found. After a few months of this he disappeared on social media for a bit. Then he came back and said he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and was in treatment for it now. He also apologized for telling everyone to F off. One of my husband's good friends was never formally diagnosed, but we're almost certain he had some form of paranoid schizophrenia. He began to be very paranoid about anything when his symptoms first started. He believed a lot of conspiracy theories, like crazy ones about aliens invading and that a group of aliens from space were watching his every move. On one occasion, he and my husband had gone to a coffee shop together and after about 45 minutes, the friend started to tense up and talked about how another man in the shop was a secret agent sent to spy on him. Instead of saying something like, "Nah man, everything's fine, you're overreacting," my husband grabbed his friend's hand and said, "Man, that sounds terrifying. Let's get out of here and go to another shop instead where you'll feel more safe." I tear up a little bit just thinking about it. He was a completely normal guy until his symptoms started around age 23, with the exception of having some depression and probably being an alcoholic. He was an incredibly smart guy, but last year he killed himself. He had been largely abandoned by his friends for being too weird and he didn't have much going for him when he had to move back home with his parents. But I'll always remember how kind and compassionate my husband was to him in those last months. His parents were also not very helpful and kind of brushed off his weird mannerisms and so they didn't try to get him help. My first indication that he had become schizophrenic were his really cryptic Facebook posts that he'd make. They just seemed a little off, nothing that would make you scream, "Oh my gosh, I think he's schizophrenic." They were just much different to things he'd normally post. Not schizophrenic but bipolar, which has led to psychosis. For me it started with derealization and depersonalization and escalated from there. I wasn't real and the world wasn't real led to seeing spiders all over the walls and thinking that aliens were trying to kill me and I had to kill them first. A friend was concerned and had the police do a welfare check and I tried to stab the cop with a large knife because I thought he was an alien. That crap is scary. Once they got me into the hospital and got me some treatment I did much better. I'm actually off all my meds now and doing pretty good as far as my delusions, but my life is also in a much better place. There is hope. My heart hurts saying this. My mother often asks me to come to her room and if I can hear what she hears. But it's all silent. It's hard to get diagnosis and no one wants to label it sad. I'd say early symptoms would be hearing noises, nervous laughter out of context, and perhaps talking, shouting back to voices that aren't around. Stay strong. Life can be trash sometimes, but sometimes it's not so trash. Disclaimer. It's hard to say if this was caused by schizophrenia or something else, as I was incorrectly diagnosed with something else and had a poor reaction to the meds. Or more accurately had a poor reaction to quitting the meds because I didn't like the side effects. Anyways, I became convinced that the universe was a Matrix-like simulation and that I was some kind of main character, if you will, and that I wouldn't face any negative consequences for my actions since I was destined to win. I stopped going to my job, but I didn't mention it to my fiance. I'd just head out in the morning and go frick around for 8 hours. I'd had a fairly conservative upbringing and had only had sex with my fiance, which I decided wasn't fair, so I set about trying to frick as many women as possible. I slept with about 5 women during this episode, and at the time felt zero remorse because hey, I'm the star of the show and since I want to do it that makes it okay. In retrospect, it's probably good that my deluded self didn't decide killing people for fun or something was a good way to test out life without rules. I also sometimes think back to my behavior during that time and question things like self-identity or the idea of a set personality. In my normal state, I'm a somewhat quiet and unassuming guy, but deluded me was a charming, confident devil who took risks and always knew what to say to women. Kind of scary honestly. This all took place over the course of just under a month. A couple of weeks to decide this was all a joke and that following the rules was for suckers. Then 2 weeks of not going to work and sleeping around. Obviously my fiance found out and left me, and my parents forced me to go back to the psychiatrist after that. Thanks dad. The warning signs were the pretty typical sudden shift in worldview and erratic behavior, but I was really going out of my way to hide it. But yeah, if your friend or family member goes from deeply religious to atheist seemingly overnight, or vice versa, and they undergo a drastic change in behavior, particularly if it's for the worse, that's bad news. The good news is that the proper meds, mindfulness, and having a fairly rigid and disciplined lifestyle allow me to lead a pretty normal life. So that's nice. The first sign for me was seeing two of my best friend in her house when I came over. Not like in a friendly way like this is a freaking doppelganger and it will eat me kinda way. There were several times during the middle of the night I would get so freaked out by them I'd call my parents. This was in elementary school. To pick me up, and we lived a city away. During high school I would start having trouble with sleep, oversleeping to the point of falling asleep in class and standing up in the halls, and not sleeping sometimes for days. Then I'd start to hear my name being called randomly and it would make me jump at how sudden it was. And I started thinking something paranormal was stalking me and I'd hear creaks and bumps and footsteps in the house and the smell of dead things when no one was home. Senior year I started detaching from my friends, and I got more irritated at things. A year after high school I went into an episode where although that thing was in my house and really trying to hurt me this time, and I ran out of the house and through the streets, convinced that anyone that came into sight was there to get me. When that ended I realized hey that's not normal, something's off. But I still didn't do anything until about half a year into working at my job. I was getting burnt out fast because I kept thinking my clients could hear my thoughts and would follow me home after my shift ended. Moral of my story is if you're in high school and you have a sudden change that feels like depression but also is coupled with very fantastical thoughts and you catch it, that's when you need to go check it out. If you're in your 20s and you start hearing your name being called more frequently than the normal person might, you definitely need to get checked out, because that can escalate very quickly into hearing voices full on. Not myself, but my best friend. She got very paranoid. She was convinced her roommate was putting cameras up in the apartment. This was in 2005, so well before they were affordable. She said people were following her and taking her things. Knowing what we do now, these were red flags. Problem was, she was always kind of dippy and the change in her behavior was so slight at first I don't think there was any way we could have known. She had her first break about 5 months later. Schizophrenia runs in my family, but I haven't been diagnosed. Not that I go to the doctor, and the symptoms all stopped suddenly about half a year ago, but it started off with physical hallucinations. Small stuff like the feeling of spiders on me, but then it grew to feel like I'm covered in spiders. Then the feeling of a rope around my neck choking me. I started hearing voices whispering gibberish in my ear. These were inconvenient, but didn't really mess with my life. But one morning I woke up because I heard a beep. The first thought in my head was the fricking aliens put a device to record me and spent about an hour looking for it before I realized I was being crazy. This happened a bit for a couple of years. Then suddenly it stopped. Not sure why, but I'm glad. Started seeing faces in everything. Thought I had some special mission or purpose. When extremely sad, I would spend hours daydreaming of myself in some alternate world. Also experienced missing time. The first signs were grandiose beliefs in myself. Thinking I would be a revolutionary Steve Jobs type person. Thinking people on TV were giving me deep messages. Thinking the thoughts in my head were being broadcast to other people I looked at. To warn others I would highly recommend not doing psychedelic drugs including marijuana if there is any mental illness history in your family. Not schizophrenic, but I have delusions. Paranoid ones. I don't want to get into detail, but there are times where I am aware I am having delusions, but I can't trust myself. It's a special kind of heck. Same here man. Exactly why I can't smoke weed anymore. Just get really paranoid and can't listen to people talk as it just trips me out. Sober I'm fine. Drunk I'm fine. But weed, it brings me to a very weird place. When my brother starts going off the rails, He laughs and laughs, like doubled over and laughing for ages, uncontrollably. At least he's having a good time. I just heard a study or something about this recently. Ugh. I don't remember where, but people with schizophrenia are doing so much better with early intervention and new meds now, essentially leading normal or near normal lives. It really did sound very promising. My mom's first signs were complete and absolute breaks from reality. No escalation that I can remember. Maybe she was just extremely good at hiding her issues. One time when I was in high school in the late zeros, she thought it was the early 90s. She didn't know where her toddlers, my sister and I, didn't know where she was. She was in our family home of almost a decade. Thought she was still married to my biological father. They divorced in 1996 after years of my mother being abused by him. It was so sad. She didn't know I was me. She wasn't dangerous or violent, just terrified and more confused than anyone else I've ever seen. My roommate got diagnosed while I was living with her. It started with her not feeling the need to sleep. She went 3 days with no sleep and then she slipped into a purely manic state. Full-blown hallucinations. Talking to herself. Not eating. I would say this was the earliest sign. Feeling no need to eat or sleep for her at least. Not schizophrenic, but have gone through delusions and the like. If you ever get worked up over something, always check the facts behind it. Not opinions. Just plain fact. No facts. Don't even consider it. I've also been having weird delusions lately, but, as you said, I usually rationalize and expel them quickly. What does it mean if I feel like life around me doesn't revolve, unless I'm involved in it? Like my own life is just mine's, and anyone else in my life is all just in my own world mind? I sometimes feel like this, but not all the time, obviously. Deja vu. I would get trapped in trying to break free from deja vu loops. As a kid I was convinced my bed was a time machine cause I kept reliving the same instances over and over again. It started with 74 hours straight of insomnia, followed closely by seeing loved ones that have died keep walking past me. My brother suffered from delusions. He never received a diagnosis of schizophrenia. He was extremely adverse to sharing his symptoms and therapy. Hindsight is 20/20, but I believe his initial onset was in his early 20s. He became extremely paranoid, very into conspiracy theory, isolated himself from his friends and family, had very erratic sleep patterns, and had some visual hallucinations involving lights in geometric patterns. He was living alone at the time, so I really can't say exactly how extensive everything was. It then progressed to much more elaborate delusions and erratic behavior as he got older. For what is worth, I know now that schizophrenia is progressive and outcomes are best when a person receives treatment with the initial onset of symptoms. I never undressed fully in front of a mirror because I thought people would be able to see me. I wouldn't think certain things for fear that there would be someone who could read minds and find me. This is only a small part of it, but after watching The Truman Show I literally ran out of the theater and believed this was a small crack from the outside world trying to send a message. I wasn't able to go back to my life normally and saw the machine of life in action. I would see the kids go to school and sit down for class, completely oblivious. Friend circles would form and the emos would still get bullied. Teachers working and hall aides monitoring, as if my existence didn't matter, like when a possible world we live in could be nothing but a real Truman Show. I never felt more disconnected from reality than that time. I rewatched the movie a few times, but in the far back of my head I still believe in the chance of it being possible. I've been tearing up reading this. This post made me realize I'm a schizophrenic. I'm seeing a psychologist in 2 hours and it's finally time to tell the truth of my condition. I'm 29 years old and I've suffered for about 5 years. Thinking the TV was talking about me, cartoons laughing at me, thinking there were aliens in my backyard. I've also wandered the streets aimlessly alone at night with a voice telling me I needed to go to church, which is probably a classic. I have suffered enough and tonight, I'm seeking help. Thank you for not letting me feel alone. Forgive me for putting my condescending pants on, but it appears to me from your comments that you are concerned about some of the symptoms you have been experiencing. If you are worried that you may be developing a mental disorder, please go talk to your regular doctor or a psychiatrist about what you are going through. As you say, Chances are that what you have been feeling could be nothing but worst case scenario and you do have a mental disorder. Early treatment has been shown to improve outcomes and delay could make things worse. Even just talking about things can sometimes help, and your doctor, a psychiatrist, or a psychologist are trained to handle these discussions. Reddit is, for the most part, a terrible place for medical advice and full of anecdotal evidence. Situational irony of this post aside, and seeking help from a trained and licensed professional is the best advice that I can give you. If this post was made out of pure curiosity, then please forgive my unsolicited lecture. Be well. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.